Good morning, and big thanks to TechWadi for this great event, and especially to Dr. Osama, who's a great advocate of 500 startups and a great supporter. Dave, so basically, I've been here in Silicon Valley for 9 months, and I've seen how active this ecosystem is.
We haven't kicked you out yet. That's amazing.
Not yet, not yet. I've seen how active this ecosystem is, how many sort of unicorns come up every month, and I always wonder, why are we investing in MENA?
Well, I think aside from great food and great music and great people, we think that the MENA region has a lot of potential in terms of customers and opportunity. Probably 100 to 200 million people online right now, and hopefully closer to 400 or 500 million over the next few years. Very young audience, growing internet penetration, delivery and logistics getting easier, payments online getting easier. But probably just the biggest reason is there's an arbitrage opportunity in terms of consumption and availability of products. So there's a very significant part of the world's population that speaks Arabic and wants to consume products and services, but really probably only 1% or less of the world's content and product that's targeted for that market. And I think there's also opportunities for entrepreneurs in that market to go global as well. But I would say the near-term opportunity is specifically the Arabic-speaking markets, North Africa, the Gulf, and Levant. And we think that's pretty exciting. We've done about 30 investments so far in the region. Hope to be doing at least 10 to 20 per year going forward.
When was your first time in the Middle East?
I think sometime in 2012. I'm not quite sure.
Do you remember that trip, or do you remember any parts of that trip, or your first impression? And
yeah, I think we visited Jordan, Turkey, and Dubai. I think UAE. Sorry, and we met Fadi Gandour on that trip. I don't know if we had already made our first investment or not, but I think sometime around that trip. But in the last 3 years have definitely done a lot more. We've hired someone in the region, actually Hassan Haider in Bahrain. Zafar joined us, came to San Francisco. And we've had several companies from Jordan, Egypt, Lebanon, I think UAE and Turkey come to our program here in San Francisco.
Today, 500 has invested in around 1,200 companies.
Close to 1,300, but somewhere around 1,200 to 1,300.
That's like when I joined, we were at 800, and whenever we pitch 500 to potential investors or to entrepreneurs,
we have to keep updating that number.
We have to keep updating that number. We're at 1,300 right now. How many international investments?
Overall portfolio is probably about 30% international. Capital weighted, it may be around 20%. But in over 50 countries, and we have team members in 17 or 18 countries, I think, now.
And how does that compare to your typical VC here in Silicon Valley?
It does not. There's nothing typical about what we're doing, and particularly for Silicon Valley, it's pretty strange or pretty unusual.
And why do we do that?
Why do we do that? I don't know. Why do you think we do that?
So I've heard you say that innovation comes from all over the world, etc.
Yes.
But when you talk about VC money and when you're dealing with LP money, it's like all about IRR, and
it's true.
We always get sort of challenged with our model. And
yeah, I think the traditional perspective on where venture makes money, at least the traditional perspective in the Valley, is that it makes money in the Valley, or at least in the US, primarily in the Bay Area, New York. And maybe Boston and LA and a few other places. So that's kind of the safe bet. And I think if you look at the numbers, probably the significant majority of unicorns and outcomes have come from the US and from the Valley, at least historically. However, if you're looking at the data more recently in the last 5 years, there's a lot of big companies that are getting started outside the Valley, particularly in China, in Korea and India, in Europe, and I think we're starting to see the emergence of big companies in other areas that have potential. So Souk.com and others in the MENA region have quite a bit of potential. But if you're looking for historical data that sort of supports that thesis, I think you're not going to be willing to take that risk. So I tell people that if you're, kind of looking for historical data to make your investment thesis for the future, you might as well just look up your own ass for evidence, because you're not going to find any. I mean, at the same time, you're also not going to find 3 billion smartphones spread across the planet and distributed widely outside the US. So the data for where historical exits comes from users and customers, and then from acquirers. And I think if you look forward, you're going to see, those acquirers are not just Microsoft and Facebook and Google and Amazon. There are also companies like Baidu and Tencent and Alibaba in China. There are companies like SoftBank and Rakuten in Japan. There are plenty of other big non-technology companies in multiple geographies. And I think you're going to see a lot of times the acquirer for a travel startup or healthcare education startup is not going to be Google or Microsoft. It's going to be the offline equivalent of that business that's in travel or in healthcare and education. And if they aren't willing to acquire, then they're going to get acquired actually, or they're going to get crushed by their online counterparts. So, long form answer there, I think, is most of the growth that's happening in the world is not in the US. Whether or not there's innovation that's unique or, happening here, there's tons of innovation happening around the world. Two very specifically overlooked markets are the Spanish-speaking market and the Arabic-speaking market. They're spread across multiple countries, so it's not just one particular place. But right now, innovation is cheap in those markets. As an investor, if you're willing to take risk, you're going to make money. It's probably over a decade time frame, and you're going to make some mistakes. You have to be willing to invest in a lot of companies, I think, to find the unicorns. But right now, I think the Arabic-speaking market, it's one of the most interesting places on the planet to invest. And fortunately for us, one of the least competitive places, at least at the moment.
I see on the 500 deck that we have like 3 unicorns.
So far, yes. Hopefully 30 more in the making that are over 100 million. We'll see.
And one of them is international.
GrabTaxi is a Uber competitor that we invested in out of Southeast Asia. Kylie Yang, our managing partner in Malaysia, invested in that company. And yeah, and they're, I believe, according to the last round, over $1 billion valuation.
How far do you feel we are from adding a unicorn from MENA to that list?
Well, I don't know where Souk is in terms of valuation, but I would guess it's probably pretty close. Different perspectives on that particular company, but I'm not so much concerned with whether we get to a specific $1 billion valuation. I think for us, we feel like we can make money even for companies that get to $100 million valuations. I think what's more interesting is to look at, are there companies in the region that are getting traction and that are making progress moving from seed to Series A and from Series A, hopefully to Series B? And I think the answer is yes. There's tens of companies that are at that stage. I don't know if there's hundreds just yet. But probably one of the challenges there is there sufficient Series A and B capital in the region to help finance and fuel those companies, or do they have to look outside the region to find that capital availability?
So throughout your travels, we once calculated in the office, and I think your body travels at an average of 8 miles per hour, 24 hours a day.
I'm probably in 20 countries a year, 50 cities a year. I'm on the road about 50% of the time.
What sort of insights can you share with us? How do you compare the MENA ecosystem? What are the common things that you're seeing internationally, and what are the differences between our ecosystem and other ecosystems around the world?
Well, I think there are smart people everywhere, and so contrary to a lot of investors who I think investors in almost every emerging market think their entrepreneurs are the problem, and their entrepreneurs are the ones that are not mature enough or developed enough or good enough, and that is complete bullshit. If anything, it's the investor part of the equation that is the weak link. Usually it's the investors who are not experienced enough, the investors who are not willing to take risk, the investor ecosystem that is not developed enough. The entrepreneurs are fine. Like, there is not any problem with entrepreneurs. Again, we've invested in 30 companies in the region. At least a third of them are progressing to a point that I think is comparable to Silicon Valley sort of progress. But the challenges continually in these ecosystems is, are there investors ready to finance the next round, ready to step up to the table? Are they able to move quickly? Is there a competitive market for that capital? And I think in the last 3 years, there are now some seed and Series A funds in the MENA region. And there are great people running those funds, but unless there are two or more of them actively competing for a deal, they tend to sit on their hands and they don't move very quickly, which is frustrating for those of us who are investing at the accelerator and seed stage. Not because we need them to be the first money in, but we need their capital to move forward to the next level.
And on the issue of small checks versus large checks, so not most of the VCs, but many of the VCs today in the region want to write the 2 million to 5 million check.
Yes, and I can't suggest that they need to write a different size check. That's based on their decisions about their own business and economics, but I think clearly the challenges in the MENA region and in most regions is checks that are between 100,000 to 1 million, maybe up to 2 million. That's really the critical stage of capital. I tweeted out a couple of images and slides that talk about what are critical factors in ecosystems. Everybody's doing accelerators now. I don't think we're at a lack of capital availability at the $10,000 to $100,000 level. There's certainly no lack of people starting incubators or accelerators around the world. Most of them probably still suck, but at least there's lots of options there. And I think there are some seed funds and Series A funds that are active in almost every market that are writing $1 million, $2 million, $5 million checks and up. But what's really missing is people who are willing to do $500,000 to $1 million rounds, even $250,000 rounds, and people willing to write 50 to 500K checks. And unfortunately, the economics on those types of investments, whether that's an angel or a small seed fund in the $5 to $20 million range, those economics are very challenging. For people who can raise money, they tend to want to raise more money. They tend to want to write checks later in the stage of development. But in every ecosystem, if you're trying to get companies to Series A and Series B, you need a lot of companies at accelerator and seed stage getting financed to get there. So if everybody's sitting around the pool waiting for somebody else to write the check and waiting for these Series A companies to develop, but nobody's writing checks at seed stage, nobody's writing that $250,000, $100,000 to $500,000 check, you're not going to get companies to that level. So again, my emphasis is it's not the entrepreneurs that are the problem. It's the investors that are the problem. And if you really want to push it further, it's the LPs and the governments that are trying to figure out these strategies that are a problem, because they should be requiring, when they're putting in capital, that capital goes in at a certain stage. It's not the size of the fund, but the size of the investment check and the stage of the investment check that is absolutely critical. And companies that have product market fit and have some early customer usage but aren't profitable yet, typically those companies are getting starved for capital because investors are not risk-oriented enough.
Any suggestions on how this could be dealt with?
Clone Fadi Gandour and clone Dr. Osama and a few other folks in the region. I think what's great is folks like Fadi who have entrepreneurial experience are willing to take risk. I don't know what the number is, but I'm sure Fadi's done at least 50 angel investments personally. He's done more through other investment vehicles that he's funded. For those of you familiar with the Turkey ecosystem, Hassan Aslanoba, similar story, very high net worth individual, made money in a water business, sold that business for several $100 million, and put about $30 million into the Turkish ecosystem in the pace of maybe a year or two. And he invested specifically at seed stage. He was doing about $500,000 to $2 million checks and investments, and even funded some seed funds. So I think the challenge is really finding investors who have entrepreneurial experience and ambition, people who are willing to start the, let's say $10 to $20 million size fund, maybe up to $50 million size fund, but people particularly who are willing to write checks at the seed stage. That's really where capital is required.
And what's your advice to entrepreneurs? What can they do till that is sort of figured out?
Expect not to get any money from venture and hustle your ass off and focus on customers. I think too many entrepreneurs rely on angel investors and venture as a crutch. And yes, it would be great if that happened, but I always tell the story that raising money and starting a business in Silicon Valley 20 years ago was probably harder than it is to raise capital any place in the world right now. So, it's not just the investors that I think are problematic. Sometimes I feel like entrepreneurs are whiners, and I go around to different parts of the world, and they always like, oh, I wish I were in Silicon Valley, or I wish I had your access to capital that you guys have in Silicon Valley, because then I would be successful. And I'm like, bullshit, you know. Silicon Valley 20 years ago, it took you $5 to $10 million in several years to get a business off the ground, and there were barely 100 million users online, if at all. Nobody had access to payments. Nobody had anything. It was mostly just, you know, the enterprise market. And so people who are complaining about the fact that now it takes you, you know, $100,000 or less than $100,000 to get a product off the ground, and you need to raise $1 million to go get customers. Like, I know it would be easier, but if your product is worthwhile, customers will pay you for it. You know, so venture is a very special case of building a business where you actually have capital ahead of customers giving you that capital. And even with crowdfunding now, you can probably get capital ahead of having to deliver products. So, you know, although we talk about all the things that would get startup ecosystems rolling, entrepreneurs don't need venture capitalists. Smart and creative entrepreneurs can find capital from customers, from cash flow, from friends and family, from government grants, from everything and anything under the sun. And, you know, yes, at $1 million to $5 million, that gets harder. But for the first 100,000 or so, if you've got an interesting business at some scale, you can probably figure out a way.
In the Valley here, you advocate for larger portfolio size.
I advocate for larger portfolio size all over the world. That's not just here in the Valley.
How does that hold in the Middle East? Do you feel first?
I don't think it's any different. I mean, I think our model is that, you know, we invest in 100 companies. We think 20 of them will get to an exit. We think 5 to 10 of them will get to a large exit that's 10 to 20x. We think 1 or 2 of them will get to a unicorn or very big exit that's 50 to 100x. I don't think we're any better than 1 to 2% of, you know, our investments getting to that size. And if you have a portfolio size of less than 50, you might get 0 of those big wins. And I think that's at least as hard, if not harder, internationally.
And investing all over the world, do you feel that some markets have a higher death rate for startups? How does the Middle East sort of success rate compare to other regions around the world and then to the Valley?
I mean, perhaps higher death rate only because of what I mentioned and that there's a lack of access to capital. I don't think the businesses have, you know, it's not like entrepreneurs in, you know, the MENA region or in India or someplace else are lesser caliber than. I hate the fact that everybody worships Silicon Valley and puts it on a pedestal. If you look at Silicon Valley, you know, very, very few people were born in Silicon Valley. I certainly wasn't. I grew up in West Virginia and came here from another place. Most entrepreneurs in Silicon Valley were born someplace else. A lot of them were born outside the US. So if you look at like who's in Silicon Valley, it's the rest of the world. And so, you know, to assume that entrepreneurs are somehow not as capable when they're outside Silicon Valley, it's the same demographic. It just hasn't left the country yet.
2 more questions. One about your last trip to Gaza.
So actually, I went to Palestine about a month ago. I had the chance to visit Ramallah and Gaza. The Ramallah trip was great. We actually saw a bunch of companies. We might even be investing in one of them soon. I was pretty impressed. I had no experience in any parts of Palestine, and Ramallah was a lot different than I expected.
What did you expect?
Thank you to Zori, who's here. Zori Alayan was the reason that I went to Palestine. Her and her husband are doing amazing work all over the world, but particularly Zori's doing great work in Palestine.
What did you...
Yes. She's... And lots of other people too, but she was the reason that I went there. And I got to visit the Sky Geeks in Gaza. Ileana Montauk has helped get that off the ground. And what is that? Sky Geeks is an incubator in Gaza City that's run by Ileana. I believe she's an American citizen who went over there about a year ago. She runs that with other local Palestinians, local Gazans as well. I think they have about 10 companies in the program currently. And I think she's just getting started maybe on the second batch, but I think they're most of the way through the first cohort. Anyway, I went to Gaza. I had the opportunity to go to Gaza, and that was pretty amazing. I got to meet some of those companies.
What were
I almost didn't get back from Gaza. Kind of not really that funny, actually. We kind of cut it a little close, I guess, and I wasn't very familiar making that crossing. For anybody here actually, well, probably none of you have actually done that crossing. If you're Arab, it's tough to get in there. I went through from Tel Aviv, I guess, well, sorry, Erez Gates. Yeah, and then it's kind of a, you go to one area, you have to walk through a crossing area, then there's kind of a long section that we got through on a golf cart. It might have been about a half-mile long or so. When I was going over, I was with people who knew what they were doing, and everybody kind of took care of me. On the way back, I had to kind of do it by myself, and I was a little nervous. The gate that day, because of an Israeli holiday, was closing slightly early, and I think we were cutting it a little close. I got there. Yeah, right. I was not dressed like this. I probably wouldn't have gotten back over. Anyway, we got to the gate area at about 5 minutes to 1, and the crossing was supposed to close at 1 o'clock that day. So I got there in time, but probably not comfortably enough time, and I think the people on the other side had decided to take off for the holiday a little bit early. So I was standing there taking pictures of this closed iron door and tweeting them out helplessly to both friends on the Palestinian side and on the Israeli side, saying, please help me get through the gate. And I think, I'm kind of making a little bit of a joke about this, but it's not a joke, and I guess experiencing what Palestinians probably have to experience every day of their lives was a little more obvious to me. And I'm guessing that a lot of folks in Gaza don't have friends on the Israeli side that they can call for favors and help open doors and have people come back to their posts to open up the gate. I mean, what happened to me that day was extremely unusual. I was very fortunate that I had access to people who could tell someone to come back to their post after they'd gone home and reopen a border for me. Like, that's an incredible white male privilege, American privilege. Like, we're taking white male privilege to another level with, like, the fact that I got a border crossing reopened in a semi-war zone. That was very fortunate. Understanding that that is a unique privilege that probably even I couldn't pull off in most circumstances, but that many other people will never, ever be able to pull off, is an important understanding of the problem. And I don't know what... And I don't think you need a white guy up here telling you about that. But yeah, I think I got, after visiting Ramallah and Gaza, and actually Rawadi, which was a really amazing experience. For those of you who know about Rawadi, I would encourage you to get the chance to visit there if you can make it. That was really inspiring. Even just visiting Ramallah and having a better understanding of what was going on there and seeing startups that really have promise there was very encouraging. So I don't know, figuring out problems in the Middle East is super complicated, and, Shia-Sunni problems are at least as complicated, if not more so, than Arab-Israeli problems. There's lots of shit to figure out that I think, if we spend the rest of our lives working on it, we make a little progress, that would probably be great.
What did you expect before getting to Gaza and meeting the entrepreneurs and the support organizations there?
I had no expectations. I just wanted to meet people who I thought were doing great work, and particularly in a challenging place. And as expected, those people were amazing, both Ileana and her, I'm sorry, I'm forgetting the name of the other Palestinian who's helping run the program there. The entrepreneurs, they were smart, they were funny, they were energetic, they were enthusiastic. It was inspirational to meet people working on startups there, and that fires me up. And, I think people are probably like, why the hell are you going to Gaza? Like, are you really thinking you're going to find investments there? And I don't really know. Probably it's still early, but if you give Ileana and the local market a chance, I bet you they will have some interesting folks to invest in. Certainly Ramallah, I think, is ready.
Would you tell us a bit about Geeks on a Plane? How did you come up with the concept? What is it exactly?
What is Geeks on a Plane? It's a thinly veiled exercise in me wanting to travel the world and finding other people to come along with me. I think we're getting the hook here soon. Salwa is telling us to get off stage. Yeah. So we'll have one last plug here. I started doing these trips with some friends of mine in 2009 when I was still at Founders Fund. We've done about 16 of those trips now over the last 5 years to over 30 countries. We take entrepreneurs and investors, not just from the Valley, but from all over the world to other parts of the world. We visit other entrepreneurs and investors and occasionally governments and other big companies, and we try and learn about what their lives are like and what the markets are like. Some of that is an economic exercise, and some of that is just a social exercise. 3 years ago, we started going to the Middle East. This will be our third trip in December. We're visiting Jordan again, Amman, I think Abu Dhabi, Dubai, and UAE, and Cairo in Egypt. We'll be attending the Rise Up conference in Egypt. We'll be hosting a pre-money conference, I think, in Abu Dhabi or Dubai, and we'll be visiting entrepreneurs we've invested in all 3 countries. For those of you who are interested in joining us, we'd love to have you. We're going for about a 10-day trip in December, first part of December, I think, early part of December.
5th of December.
And you can find out more information at geeksonaplane.com. Apologies to Samuel L. Jackson. And it's a really fun trip. We have lots of people who go with us. Again, it's not just white guys from Silicon Valley. Typically, it's entrepreneurs from the region and investors from the region. Fadi was a great host for us at one point. We might entice Chris Schrader and some other people to come along. I'm sure you'll enjoy it if you get a chance.
Dave, thank you so much. Big thanks to Takwadi as well for hosting us. Thank you all.